Welcome everyone to episode 8 of Developer Dialogue. I'm your host, Jean, the Strategy Wargamer. I'm here with my trusty and dependable co-hosts, Matt, the Historical Gamer, and Eric, Tortuga Power. Welcome guys. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Yeah, just us here, right?
Now we have one special guest with us. That's Christian Latour. He's the project director of the Supreme Ruler game series. Now, the company, the studio name is Battlegoats, I believe, correct?
Yeah, Battlegoat Studios. Thanks for having me.
We were actually talking about before this show, and I was talking to Eric regarding Supreme Ruler series, and I feel like honestly, this is the Supreme Ruler series is like the superpower that we should have gotten.
I can understand that. We've been compared to superpowers many times over the years, and there's just not a lot on the market like either of us.
Yeah, especially in Cold War too. I can't recall any. I mean, everybody wanted Paradox to do a Cold War. They haven't done it yet. I think you guys are the only strategic and technically. I mean, you have some tactical battles, but I guess it's like a zoomed in version of the battlefield. So I would say tactical too. War game of the Cold War, right? Because I don't recall any other games that come to mind that cover the Cold War in such a way that with a geopolitical simulator.
Yeah, we definitely try and be tactical, and sometimes we cheat and try and call ourselves both, just because we have the good fortune of having a game engine that we've developed from the ground up. And it's capable of doing some things that you can't get from an off-the-shelf game engine. It misses a few bells and whistles, but I have a game where I can be zoomed in on my hometown of Hamilton, scroll the wheel back and go all the way out to see the global map, point my mouse at Tokyo, scroll the wheel in really fast, and bang, I'm right up close to Tokyo. The ability to have the whole cylindrical. We could never do a spherical, and anytime somebody suggests that, I like curl into a ball. But yeah, this cylindrical map that we've got that allows you to pop in and out of different areas of the world, I definitely feel we've come to the market with something unique, and we've been at this. 2020, Supreme Ruler 2020 was the first one that did cylindrical map. Our very first title, Supreme Ruler 2010, was just sort of pockets of the map. And Supreme Ruler 2020, that was 2008 or 2009 that came out, and nobody's really done something quite like we've done since then.
If we take a step back, because Supreme Ruler covers a lot, as you just said, a lot of different sort of eras, and some of them when they came out were kind of like future, and then obviously the look back at the Cold War. But if we were to take a step back and say, you know, if you were to give me your 20-second or 1-minute elevator pitch of what Supreme Ruler is to folks who are not familiar with the series, how would you describe it?
Well, I'll have to restrict myself to an elevator pitch for one of the titles. So I'll talk about Supreme Ruler Ultimate, which would still be considered our flagship title, because Galactic Ruler is still in early access, so it wouldn't become flagship for a little bit. So the elevator pitch for Supreme Ruler Ultimate is that we've created a game that you can start in modern day Cold War, World War II, or with a small DLC in World War I. Start as any nation of the world, major or minor, control their military, economy, commerce, research, diplomacy, and just try and see if you can survive, if you can do better than the leaders who came before you, sort of thing. In a nutshell, I think that's about what it is.
Yeah, and I think to that point, it was always interesting to me. Is it Supreme Ruler 1936? I forget which one. There's one where I was playing as Italy right before World War II, and I was trying to deal with the invasion of Ethiopia, and how difficult some of that stuff was. A lot of times you read about like World War II history, and it's kind of like, haha, Italy, struggling against a non-industrial power, but it I think the game does an interesting job, as we were talking about the battlefield side of things, where it really does model things like supplies and sort of the difficulty of supporting large forces in different types of environments, while also giving you that sort of holistic command of your industrialized nation and the politics of the nation as well. So it's a really sort of unique blend of challenges and gameplay design choices, and it's quite enjoyable.
Oh, I'm glad it's enjoyable. It's definitely our first focus. The realism that blends into it is both a bonus and a curse, in the sense that, the supply model we have is something that it is one of our greatest achievements to me. The idea that you have a game where it's not just about making the bullets, but connecting the bullets to the guys in the field and using it. That we had that system working pretty well already in the first title, Supreme Ruler 2010. And that first title was not a huge commercial success. It just really got us noticed on the market. But one of the interesting things that a story that came out of developing Supreme Ruler 2010 was we did actually sell if I recall correctly, it was a license for 30 copies to West Point because they wanted to use the fact that our software forced their students to consider the fact that it's not just about getting the tank to the front line, but about the logistics of keeping it shooting and moving while it's at the front line. And to this day, nobody's ever checked on how much their curriculum used it. But it's a little point of pride that we take to be able to say West Point thought our supply model was good enough to do that. And it's definitely for, we've already on our forums, I know that Tortuga, Eric, you've at least followed some of this, to know that we've already announced we're going to be doing a Supreme Ruler next gen. That we haven't said what the era is going to be, and there's still discussions amongst the team what it's going to be. But Supreme Ruler Ultimate is not the last Supreme Ruler game. When we're done with Galactic Ruler, there's just more we want to do. We're going to go back and do another Supreme Ruler game.
Before we kind of dive too much into Supreme Ruler, I wanted to kind of know a little bit more about you.
Sure.
So what I wanted to kind of like discuss was what was your favorite strategy game growing up that kind of inspired you to kind of go into the industry?
Oh gosh, you want me to narrow it down to one? And I have fun with this sort of question because I don't always feel like I decided to go into game development. It was something that sort of came at me sideways as an opportunity. And I was like, all right, I'll do that for a couple of years. And now I've been at it for 20. If I think strategy game, I'd be tempted to say StarCraft, but I almost feel like that's not giving credit to Warcraft 1. Oh. Because that goes back to the era of shareware games. And so the first Warcraft 1 came out as a shareware version where you could play, I think you could play the first and the second maps through, and the third map, they'd set it up to be unbeatable.
That's right. That
you just could never complete it. But if you were really good, you could sort of stalemate the AI to the point that you'd have to stop and stuff like that. And I know I played that shareware game through so many times before I had enough money to buy myself a full copy of the game, and then Warcraft 2, and then StarCraft. I didn't really get into Warcraft 3 as much, I gotta say. It was definitely Warcraft 2 and StarCraft that really, for strategy gaming, they really piqued my interest back in those years. So, but you talk about introduction to gaming, and here I start sort of dating myself, is my father had a Tandy 1000 back in the day. And he had a 120 meg hard drive onto which we had a couple of games. And there was this old monochrome first-person Pac-Man called 3 Demon. If you look the thing up, it's part of sort of internet history at this point. And I remember that was the first game that I'd have a day off, I'd beat the high score. I'd tell my dad, he'd come in, I'm like, I beat your score. And 2 days later, he'd like, I beat your score. I had the good fortune, both my parents were teachers, and so I had a lot of good influences growing up to consider puzzles and mechanics and how systems work. And I think that's a big part of how I ended up where I am.
I remember that. I remember that Warcraft 1 demo disc that I got. I actually traded a part in some like grade school theatrical performance in order to get that disc, and that's the first game I really played. That's what got me into video games, for better or worse. So yeah, I have the same experience where StarCraft, Warcraft, Blizzard really was also my first. Anyways, that's cool to hear.
Yeah.
And then so how did you end up at Battlegoats? Did you study like computer science or development?
Nope, not at all. I cannot tell you how lucky I feel to be where I am, that circumstances definitely favored me. The owners at Battlegoat Studios, David and George, who own the company, prior to doing, and this is some of the history of the Supreme Ruler series, I'll sidebar slightly to to toot our own horn that we feel comfortable saying that the Supreme Ruler series is the longest running PC strategy game series. And the reason I can say that is George, one of the two owners, back in 1982 on the Atari ST, I might have gotten that bit wrong, but in 82 he released Supreme Ruler. That this began as a 5 1/4 floppy disk, hot seat, multi-playable, and we've still got an Atari sitting around at George's house. It's been a couple of years, but he booted it up a few years back. We tossed in the 5 1/4, and of course, all you could do, you had 640K of RAM. So the total system that you could set up was very small, that you had to make decisions about your population, decisions about your diplomacy, decisions about your military, and then let it run. And it was one of those where hot seat, everybody would decide, a bit like a game of diplomacy. You would privately decide how much you're keeping for defense and how much you're sending out on attack. And if you send a huge force to somebody who kept nothing back, you'd ravage them and get lots of resources. And you had to hope that while your army was away, nobody was attacking you. And so that was 1982. And then George tells the story about the fact that the problem was he had developed software. Nobody owned computers. So he went from selling software online to locally starting to sell computers so that people, it was just the need of the time. Out of that came a computer store that him and his partner David ran into the mid to late 90s. In the late 90s, I went to work there as that was my job. I wanted to work at a computer store. In 2000, the owners sold the computer store to new owners. I stayed in touch with Dave and George. We'd become friends and stuff. In 2001, I visit to see an early alpha, pre-alpha, such an early development of the first Supreme Ruler on modern PC, complain about my work, and they were like, well, we got room in the basement. You want to come work with us? And so everything really was self-taught in those early years of working with spreadsheets, figuring out how to make the systems go, because I don't touch any code. And again, it sort of is where I've ended up as a career, that my title is that I'm project manager. And I now have the good fortune to be teaching project management at a community college here in Hamilton. But it wasn't where I'd set out to be. And all my experience is business-based. I quite honestly have been taking some continuing ed courses because I want to have a diploma. It's a personal thing that I wish I had. You see, and now you got me talking about like my whole life story.
Yeah, that's exactly what we want.
Yeah, and so I feel very lucky to have gotten where I am. And I think it's been possible because I did understand systems, that I had done enough computer stuff over the years, like any good computer geek. I had built my own machine, I was installing my software, I was doing this sort of stuff. So when it came to designing, even though I didn't touch a line of code, I've always had a knack to be able to describe to our coders. I understand how they use variables. I understand how the systems are built, that I can describe the systems to them in ways that fit the zeros and ones that they have to make it all conform to. So yeah, and then just 20 years experience.
Question, how big is the development team now?
It's always in a state of flux because one of the things our studio has leveraged here in Ontario, Canada, we're fortunate that the provincial government sees the interactive digital media sector as a moneymaker for the province. So they do set policies in place that promote businesses like ours to exist. We get tax credits if we hire college co-op students for 4 or 8 month blocks to come work with us, which again piggybacks on the fact that I teach project management. I see the software and networking students in their second year pass through, and then 3 months later I get a whole bunch of resumes on my desk of, hey, I taught a third of these people. So I can sort of look for the people within the college who have some of the knowledge. For a while George was teaching, so we use college students at times. We've also used interns from other institutions at times. And so we look for stuff like this. Right now, the team is, and I should know this off the top of my head, I'm going to say we're 9 people, of which 3 are part-time. Yeah. And then, You'd think I would know this sort of thing because we're such a small studio that I don't just do the project management. I do our human resources and I help with our marketing, and it's so yeah. And some of that is also that we find ourselves as a very cyclical studio because we tend to use co-op students. Every 4 months we review a lot of stuff, and we'll have people who will work with us for 8 months, then be gone for 4 months because they have a heavy course load. And then we'll bring them back for another 4 months later on, and then we might have somebody else who's now finished their studies and who's looking for something bigger and might go off to another studio in the area and stuff like that. But I think the most we've ever been was 13, and in the last couple of years, the smallest I think we had a 4-month stint there where we were down to about 7 people.
Now, Supreme Ruler is the flagship. I think that's what most people know you for. You now have Galactic Ruler out, so do you want to take a moment maybe to talk about the other titles? Do you have any other titles prior to Supreme Ruler, or was that the original?
We have lots, and I can run you through the sort of the history of it. Let's see if I can get these right. I had it memorized for a while. In 2005, we released Supreme Ruler 2010. Modern day, most of the maps were regional. In 2008, we released Supreme Ruler 2020, which really moved to that fully cylindrical map, playing the whole world at once, and a DLC for that called Global Crisis in 2009. Having done the modern stuff, we were like, if we go to Cold War, we can build on our tech tree. So in 2011, we released Supreme Ruler Cold War. In 2014, early, we released Supreme Ruler 1936, doing the World War II stuff. And I'll take a small bit of credit for the fact that during those development years, when we did the Cold War, I made sure that all our modern files were transferred through and stayed compatible. And we went to the World War II stuff. I grabbed the modern and the Cold War stuff and made sure those map files were compatible. So as we got to the end of 36 and we had that all built, as a team we looked at the files we still had and we're like, look, we could do Ultimate. Get World War II, Cold War, Modern, all in one with all the scenarios and get the modern day to have the newest features because a lot had changed since then. So that was actually very late in 2014. Quite short window between those two products. Then things went quiet for a little bit. And I actually, within there, I had a 2-year stint that I was working with another studio in the city. Then mid-2016, I'd rejoined the studio, and we planned for the fact that in 2017, we released Supreme Ruler The Great War. And again, that's one that I feel we have a nice edge there, that there's not a lot of World War I geopolitical strategy games out there. When we did a lot of our research heading into it, we found that what there was usually didn't use a world map. It was hard to find games you could play the minors starting in 1914. But that still wasn't really our flagship product because it was offered first as a standalone, and about a month later we got the DLC version for those who already had the core game. Now, 2020, we have finally gotten to make a product for which we actually bought the URL, I think in 2003. That this had always been our plan, that after we wanted to do a modern day game, and then we wanted to do something space. It was these other distractions of other potential and the strength and success of the Supreme Ruler series caused us to take the side trip. Now we are tackling space, future. It gives us this opportunity for once to not be bound by historical fact, that we can be a little sillier with it. Some of the challenges that we're really for the first time dealing with now is we've got a big engine running. For anybody who's seen the early access that's available right now, it's a framework, it's an engine, it's an environment you play in. We're working now on all the narrative things that are going to really add the story and the purpose behind what Galactic Ruler is. But it already stands as something, again, unique in the industry. That when we decided to do this, we knew we had the potential, because of the engine we've created. We have a game where you can play on the surface of the planet and have combat. You can click the button to go up to the solar system level, where you can have some of your spaceships flying around having a space battle at the same time. You can then click up another time and see a galaxy map of, right now our biggest maps generate with 192, I think, not sure why it is that particular number, 192 systems. And each of those systems contains planets, and each of those planets is potentially habitable, potentially has life. And yeah, the scale of what we've done there, I feel is pretty unprecedented. Challenge is to still keep it manageable, comfortable, not overwhelming for the player. And that's why we're doing an early access now. We've already been getting some great feedback from the player. And the first week alone was this eye-opening thing of going, oh, right, they don't know these small kludges that we would use as developers to just jump around while we were testing it. It's so easy to be so close to your own product and not see some of the simple things you were missing. And yeah, so I'm proud to say that since, I think it was November 10th that we released it, so just over a month that we've been in early access. I think we've already had 6 minor, 3 major updates to the game, and some new features coming in, new visuals coming in, and stuff like that. So that's keeping the studio pretty busy for the next little while. Galactic Ruler is our focus, with knowing the long term of doing another Supreme Ruler game eventually.
One question I have is about the engine. So originally my question was whether you created the engine yourself or if it was Unreal or Unity. But you answered that. But the question I have for it, how did the engine evolve over the years from Supreme Ruler all the way up to... and I'm assuming there are parts of the Supreme Ruler engine that's going to be used in your upcoming game, well, the early access game that you have.
Yeah, there definitely are still modules, components within there. And I'm going to do my best to answer the question, but I'm going to put in that little annotation there, a reminder that I am not a programmer. I have... once in my entire career, I've touched a line of code, and it was because it was a variable for some 3D setting. And George is like, you know the 3D models. You figure out what number works here. But I can say that some of the driving force for this is that the development for a PC-based Supreme Ruler, because of the fun history of the 1982 version, the PC version began in 99. That is more than a decade before Unity is even close to viable. Unreal was around at the time, but wasn't capable of a number of the things that we wanted to be able to do. So the engine that we've built is literally from the ground up. One of the owners, our lead programmer, George, we are really lucky that he's frighteningly smart. And this is all done in C++, that he built this engine from the ground up. A small piece of the story that I don't think we would have gotten where we are without some forethought by George in the early years, that he built a tool for us that within the studio we call it the Builder. It is an executable that allows me, who knows nothing about coding, to build a object-oriented user interface in blocks. And he used a system that we refer to as action codes and data codes. And I could simply tell him, I need this data code I've given this box this data code. Please fill it with this data. I've given these 3 buttons, these 3 action codes. I want them to do these actions. And so the evolution of the engine was paired up with the evolution of the Builder, and the system has definitely gotten more complex. And it can easily be argued that what I do nowadays isn't just assembly, it's also scripting. But it's all within an engine that we've designed. So, and the 2 sides of that is, the good thing is we are able to have a game of Supreme Ruler with 256 regions in the world, and many of those regions fielding over 2, 3, 5,000 units. Something that a game of Age of Empires would cry before it got 10% of the way into it. The downside is that things like using 3D models in the engine came with our second game, and getting VFX, really nice VFX, really is one of the things that the development of Galactic Ruler is going to be funding sort of for the first time, to get some advanced VFX, which hasn't usually been much of a holdback. Our community's usually been pretty clear to us that they are the type of players who are very much gameplay first, graphics second. That they want, and we all see it. We see those avid wargamers who are looking for in-depth games, and they're happy with counters on a hex map and a spreadsheet of statistics in the game. Some of that gets deeper than what we want, but we know that we can focus on the gameplay first, add the eye candy a little bit later. So.
Can I ask a question about
that?
Ahead.
I
mean, I don't want to interrupt you. This is great, but I think you you mentioned that your some of your players would be fine with counters, and I wonder, is that sometimes I've played other games with similar type graphical units, and I've definitely gotten comments in my videos of like, use the counters instead of the prettier graphics. And I wonder, is that something you guys have ever considered? I haven't seen it as an option in your games. Is that something you guys get asked?
Yes, we do get asked. It was probably one of the first requests when we did our first Supreme Ruler 2010. People came back specifically citing NATO counters. Can we have NATO counters in the game? And I remember at first thinking about it and going, okay, no big deal. Shouldn't be hard. I'll just start replacing some of the graphics. And then I realized, oh, wait a second. Suddenly those NATO counters are going to be upside down as they spin around. And I also found that, and maybe this is some of my limited understanding of how the system works, but NATO counters don't cover all the ways that we assemble military forces in our game. Like, they're really good for representing infantry, artillery, tank battalion, anti-air. But once you start getting into air squadrons and naval units, there's not a good uniformity across all of the 20 classes of units we use in the game. Now, that didn't make us close the door on the idea. We tended at that point, because it was going to be a fair amount of work, we consistently just push it back to the modding community first. Say, okay, if you guys really want this, make us a first mod. Like, try and get it at least halfway so we can get a clearer understanding of what your end goal is. And every time that I've pushed it back to the community, sadly, it's just died. That there's nobody... I think it's that people run into those same hurdles that we run into as designers, that once you start parsing all the types we use, it just doesn't seem to get anywhere. And I'll flip as well, and I think I caught that he might have been watching the stream somewhere. We have had, over the last couple of years, a gift that I can't even begin to quantify how thankful we are for it. The modding community has always been great, but over the last couple of years, one of our users named Neri has... his joy seems to be making 3D models. And so he checked with us early on about, hey, what's your format? And we love how much the modders add to it. So we told him, oh, this is what you need and stuff. And he started producing models for us that, at this point, I'm pretty sure he's added over... it's got to be over 200, maybe over 400. I should know the count for something like that. But he's provided us this wonderful collection of additional models, and we see everybody in the community loves it as well. And we actually he's been kind enough to give us the models so that we push them out with updates on Steam. This is user-created content that is improving the experience of all our players just because he has skill and passion for creating 3D models. Don't know how we got so lucky, but I'm thankful for it.
So are those are the icons then in the game for the different units?
The models, because we have an equipment database that, because it spans 1900 to the equivalent of about 2150, you can start the World War I game with leg infantry, and if you climb that tech tree, you can get to mechs and laser rifles, starting from World War I. And so we use 3D models, but a lot of times, so we got I think it's about 5,000 lines, 5,000 entries in the equipment, and each entry has about 160 data points of stats. But we definitely don't have 5,000 unique models. So I got a good example I could give is around the time of release, the United States F-16 fighter jet and the Japanese, I think it's their F-1, that the F-1 is sort of built on an airframe like the F-16 with some modifications. So when we were deciding what models to make, we're like, well, we're just going to make an F-16. We're going to use the same model in both places. And generally nobody cared. They're similar enough. And when we assign models, our focus is usually function first, visual second. And that may mean I use a model that doesn't look like what the plane looks like in the real world, but I want a player to recognize what's the purpose of this unit faster than, hey, that's what it looks like. But since all the development, Neri has made the Japanese F1 and I think the F2 Actually, the Japanese military is one that he seems to have a real passion for and has really expanded their land, air, and sea units. But yeah, we use 3D models in the game. We just sometimes a single model might be used across 15 or 20 different entries just because we don't have anything else.
That's really impressive.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, and thank goodness for Neri then. And that, Chris, how much of the game is influenced by modding, or how big is the modding community for Supreme Ruler?
It's quite big, especially considering we've always known we're a niche market. We're never going to be AAA. That's not our goal in the type of games we develop. There's lots of stuff AAA out there. There's not much stuff like us. But the community has been a big driving force. There's been things such as the game has a loyalty penalty that when you capture territory that isn't initially loyal to you, you have penalties on production in those lands. The modding community initially wanted us to do changes of loyalty, and that's a whole big topic that's been talked about many times. But instead what we offered is we simply added a switch to the game to turn off the loyalty effects. There was another one about being able to remove roads and rails that we, as designers, and sometimes we can get too entrenched and stuff. Like anyone, we can get too stuck on our own ideas. That the users wanted to be able to remove roads and rails from in-game after they were placed. And our comment was, well, after you've cut a 16-kilometer wide line through a mountain, you can't really uncut the mountain. But for gameplay reasons, there was no reason why we couldn't make it optional, so we did. After a user sort of found the UI pieces, they made an initial version of it. We saw how it worked, saw that it wasn't causing us huge problems, and then we simply brought their modifications back in. I suppose the biggest place we would put limits is sometimes the modders will go into places that we just won't have time or resources to validate that it doesn't break things, so it has to stay out there as a mod. But yeah, we get really good contents from the modders. Even nowadays, like Supreme Ruler Ultimate is now 6 years old. We've had the good fortune to be in a place where we've updated it a number of times over that 6 years. We've now officially stated development is done, though I'll drop a small hint here that we've actually realized, oh look, we've got a few other graphics there. So I think before the end of the year, there might be a few more leader picks. I have the feeling there's been some important election recently that might warrant an extra face added to the game. So, but yeah, so we've had all this 6 years. It's 6 years since that game has come out, and just over the last 2 to 3 weeks, a new user showed up on our Battlegoat forums and has started making all sorts of user interface mods, which to me is one of the hardest things about our games to mod, because that builder tool that I talked about that we use internally, that is one piece we've never made public. It is considered proprietary technology for us. That's the one piece we protect.
So you mentioned politics, and right, obviously this game is spans 100 years or something like that, at least in terms of if you start at the earliest date. Yeah. How do you manage, like, how do you approach that from a design perspective? Because I know, a lot of these pieces of the game have been sort of developed as chunks, right? You had the Cold War game, the 1936 game, and then Ultimate kind of ties it all together, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think about modeling politics over very different definitive eras? Or is that something that you just kind of, here's the game, it's the starting point, and just whatever happens, and there's not a lot of guidance there to push things along semi-historical lines?
I feel like with each of our titles, our approach has changed sometimes, even at the risk of creating a few small inconsistencies. That the modern day stuff is very much, here's where you stand, let the butterfly go, see where you end up. As soon as we started creating Cold War and 1936, we could not ignore the fact of the track history had taken. And we got an event system that was fairly powerful, allowed us to do a lot of modeling. But the changes between eras, that moving from the World War II to the Cold War, moving from the Cold War to the modern, definitely challenging, and it is one of the areas that we have simply accepted we can only deliver so much. when we're deciding what to put in, I can say that we are always aware of the historical realities as best we can interpret them. But we always make sure we never want to be 100% accurate, because we can't be 100% accurate. So we will aim for sort of an 80% accuracy and look for that other 20% to be interesting, promoting gameplay, not horribly incongruent. I remember hearing about Superpowers 2 as a game that was coming out in the same time as some of our development, and somebody complaining about in a game of that one they had like Belgium declaring war on Australia for no particular reasons. I definitely feel we avoid that type of thing, though perhaps we'll get criticized that sometimes we don't get enough unexpected wars. But maybe that's some of what we'll achieve with Supreme Ruler Next Gen. That the exciting thing for me has definitely been, no matter how much we do with this, there's more we can do, and not just for the sake of making it more complex. There are new systems and new mechanics that we have slowly built towards that we can just keep. It's the joy of having built an engine. It's ours. We can do a lot of stuff with it. It just takes time.
I beg to differ, by the way. I think that you can crank up, is because you guys have the settings, the user can interact with them. You have, volatility. It's kind of like, and then you also have the AI aggressiveness. So
yeah,
you can really tune these and get, like, I have a Cold War game that I wanted to basically be only event-driven wars, and that's the way it is. Just set the AI to passive.
Good.
But if you set those to, aggressive or high volatility, man, you get wars all over the place. I don't know who's saying you don't get wars like that. You get everybody declaring war on everyone.
And we seem to have gotten lucky with our system and the way it has some underlying influences that we've preset for who's likely to find common ground versus who's likely to find friction. And I guess the work we put in was worth it, that we seem to have created something where you don't usually get nonsense alliances or nonsense wars breaking out too much. So we did it. Yay.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because that was one of the things that kind of drove me away from Superpower, because I was just like, really? Like, I had something like Mexico declare war against Australia, and I'm like, they didn't even have military forces that could reach each other. So it was just very unrealistic and takes immersion out quite a bit.
I think within the game's context, one of the most interesting far-reaching actions we've seen the AI do before is that one of the owners was playing his campaign. He had China manage to do a naval invasion on Brazil, which not only is that a pretty long naval path to cross, but it means that they got through the Suez to get around to hit Brazil, because it's the wrong side of the continent. So yeah, AI is brutal. I have great sympathy for George and the work that he does building the AI. Building AI is painful. There's a reason why we all gravitate to multiplayer with other human players. It's unless an AI really gets to the point of having awareness, and then we're all Skynet and we're all screwed more than COVID, it's just tough to build that sort of thing. And there's definitely limits on our AI. But at the same time, I've gotten to see our AI do really interesting pincer moves, wrap moves, naval invasions. And a lot of times it'll do Hail Marys that if you catch them, you can totally ravage the AI, because it sometimes takes risky moves. But it's also, it's this, this is the one place where the community, you can never please everybody. Because if the AI is cautious, people say, well, it never takes chances. And if you let it take chances, people say it's stupid.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Really can improve. It really can impress everyone.
Exactly.
And I think it's got to be the hardest thing to make in a game. It's just so difficult. So,
one thing I've noticed in your Galactic Ruler game that you're in development with is something that kind of remarkable, I would say. And the reason why is this new game that you have focuses not only on land-based simulation, but also space-based.
Yeah.
And this is something I wish like Civilization did, because they're just stuck on land and that's all it's going to be. And, eventually you come to a point where like, hey, we have rockets, we have spaceships, let's go somewhere. My question to you is, how difficult was it to mold the engine to handle this kind of, to be honest, it's a Herculean task, because you're adding an entire new component to the game. So, how's that going?
Challenging, no doubt challenging. And I think the community has already started to notice some of the choices that had to be made in how to make this sort of thing possible. That one of the things is we are procedurally generating all of the planet's surfaces, whereas the SRU maps, those were curated. Like there's 8,000 cities on the modern map, and that's because I had to put 8,000 cities with names and base population values before things were then modified to fill in country names. So procedural generation was critical, but that means you can't really curate maps quite the same way that we would have previously. The height and width of a map, the total size of our planets, we're not doing Earth-sized planets. They are smaller if people do a hex count. I don't know if anybody's called that out yet, but eventually somebody's going to count the hexes and see that that's one of the tricks.
They will now.
Yeah, I'm not ashamed of the choice, so I got no problem talking about it. And again, within the procedural generation, the way we design our planets, we've really done away with rivers. That it's all oceans and lakes, and that you may get a one hex path that looks like it's a river, but it is very much done as lakes and oceans, because this is, again, pathfinding can get brutal on huge maps and can start to hit performance. And we're trying to build a system that at the end you'll be able to have, because 192 systems is our largest, I was saying, and then for each system you could end up with like 8 or 9 orbital positions, each of those having up to 6 moons. Like you start multiplying this up, the total number of bodies you could get is massive. So yeah, it is a matter of balancing some of our choices around how we do some of that, and we I believe that Galactic Ruler is not going to be a brother or sister product to SRU. It's going to be a cousin. That we definitely, when you talked about things we're carrying forward, the combat system, when you're doing land combat versus land combat, you still have stats like we set up in the other games of soft attack, hard attack, close. The air is doing low, mid, high, and that sort of thing. And the supply model is still there. And even the way you sign treaties right now is the same. Hoping for some enhancements to that as we get going along. But in other places we have done some simplification. The space battles, actually it's both. It's simplified and more complex. Is that it has 2 combat types, beam and ballistic, instead of the soft, hard, fort, low, mid, high. But those 2 happen simultaneously. Before, in the SRU series, the unit picks, examines its position, examines its target position. And that creates one type of attack. So ground to air or ground to close, that sort of thing. At the space level in this one, you are having ballistic and beam shots happening. And they're each compared against a different defensive stat. And you even have shielding coming into play, that you have to break down someone's shield to a certain energy threshold, so then your beams do higher damage. So these are some of the new models we want to explore, but we also know the difficulty level that we want to achieve. That even with SRU, we get people who would come back to us saying, oh, I want this, and I want that, and I want this. And we're like, no. If we do that, the total benchmark difficulty of the game will move higher, and we like where we sit within the industry. So we generally try, as we add one area of complexity, we try and find something that's been underused somewhere else, and we'll simply close that out of the engine and that sort of thing. And yeah, feel free to interrupt me because you guys give me a microphone and I'll just talk.
That's the best kind of interview, right? We just let the interviewee, give their info, and we just get to sit back and listen.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's got to be stuff you guys want to know.
Well, yeah, I do. Let me just roll up my sleeves here. I'm actually trying not to speak too much just because I feel like I'm too much of a fan of the game, and I feel like Matt and John will ask more objective, neutral questions. But let me ask a little bit about the upcoming game, because this is impossible for anybody who likes Supreme Ruler not to be excited by.
Sure.
What can you reveal to us? Or, I mean, are you going to be using the same engine? Are you planning to advance anything? So is the focus going to be more war game? Are you going to add more diplomatic elements? Do you have any idea yet?
So now I'm trying to remember the things we've said publicly and some of the things that I feel are generally safe comments. And there are a few good ones that I can probably give you. One of them, which has been coming up in our community already, there's been some discussion about it, the equipment file, the base military statistics that existed before, that data set the format is being modified slightly to conform with engine improvements that Galactic Ruler is adding. Once the format is changed, the data as it is could be reused as it is. But we have definitely heard over the years there's been some of the players who know more about military stuff than we do have pointed to some systemic limitations or flaws, just the way the whole thing came together. It's 5,000 lines that were built over 15 years. There is, high on our priority list is to do some scrubbing of the data. Now, there's a number of questions around that are unresolved. How is that done? Who is doing it? How much of the community feedback can we leverage effectively? These are big questions I can't answer yet. And one of the reasons that we also have a but first in all of this is we haven't announced what the era will be. We haven't announced if it's going to be more than one era. And I can say that part of the reason for not announcing it is that we're still contemplating some things. We're considering what works best. I do believe, my belief is we will aim for a narrower focus so that we can get a few things a little more interesting while still keeping a lot of the military combat system. I would anticipate will be very similar. The commerce system, I know that some people, again, when I talk about Galactic Ruler as a cousin as opposed to a sibling, Galactic Ruler brings the commodity count from the 11 we used to have down to the 4. When we're working on Supreme Ruler Next Generation, the engine for that, which the groundwork has already been started, it still has the 11 commodities. I'm sure somewhere someone is going to comment, well, what about water? I don't know. There'll be 11 commodities. Will we go all the way back to what we had done before of water versus the oil that we added later? That's the type of question that it's not the right time to answer that yet. Will there still be the same sort of research tree? I would expect the technology tree to have a lot of similarities in the next gen of Supreme Ruler to what we have now. But again, there's a question of, within which era? That I know that when we look at what the community talked about, and some of the driving force behind saying let's do a next gen seems to be less about the data sets and more about the feature and function. Maybe that goes to the modability that we give, that we've seen so many people take our data and do what they want with it. And we're happy about that. But that means that the more we can focus on systems and mechanics, the more the players ultimately get, because the modding community can really help with some of that. But we got to have a base game. There still is specific things we're going to want to hit with that. Yeah. That's probably about as far as I dare go, because I'll start rambling. You'll hear all my internal monologue of things keeping me up at night.
Well, that's unfortunate. We did our best, guys. We tried to get as much secrets out of him as we could, but
I think some of those things are things I'd never said before, so you pulled some out of me.
Okay, that's good. But would you say that the game still has a strong, because it's always worn, in my opinion, it's always worn these two strong gloves or these two hats, geopolitical simulator and war game.
Yeah.
And if you ask what Supreme Ruler is, I can't say one or the other. I think at some point I read some comment where it's supposed to be more war game driven. I think it was a Battlegoats comment, but you can correct me because you're the Battlegoats.
Yeah, I think we would usually say it leans towards the war game.
So do you think that that's going to be true for the next gen as well, or is that still something you guys are deciding? Will there be, like, if I do this comparison, which most people do, as we already mentioned, to Superpower 2?
Sure.
Do you think you'll move, like, I would say Superpower 2 encompasses some more of the geopolitical stuff than Supreme Ruler does.
Well,
and I'm happy to make that comparison to the developer himself,
sure.
because I can tell you that most people would say, and I certainly would say, Superpower 2 is a far inferior game to Supreme Ruler. And so that's why I feel comfortable making the comparison.
And I don't mind when we do get compared to other people in the industry, because let's not forget that Battlegoat Studios has worked with Paradox. We published some of our titles with them. And I remember for over all the years, we'll get people who come to our forums saying, I'm considering buying Supreme Ruler or Hearts of Iron. Which one should I get? And we as developers would come out and say, both. There's not enough of this type of game on the market. How can you possibly fill your library without buying pretty much everything that's out there and still wanting more? They just don't make a lot of games like ours. So we're generally thankful when we see a game like Superpowers or the success that Paradox has with the Hearts of Iron series and the modding community it has, because we do believe that those players will get curious on other stuff and we'll get trickle-down effect benefit of knowledgeable players coming to our game. But to your question, because I was almost skirted around and avoided having to answer stuff, I think mostly what you'll get from me at this point, it is going to start drifting into my opinion as a designer for the things I'll advocate for, because as a team, the decisions aren't locked in for stuff like that. Talking point-wise, I can say I would be amazed if we had a spherical world. I suspect it will be a cylindrical world. I cannot imagine where it would become a spherical world. I cannot imagine losing the economic system. I very much want to see the economic system grow. I also would love to see the diplomatic system grow. That for me as a designer and a person who plays, like I've got 3,000 hours logged into SRU. I've got a campaign. I started as Belgium in 2017. I got to 2039 and I got mechs running all over Europe. I love our game. I would love to see our game have around a 50-50 balance of the war and diplomacy, because at different stages of the game, I enjoy dabbling in each of those. And I'm somebody who loves to play in the commerce and figure out which of my industries I want to put where, and scrapping industries in low loyalty area. Like all min-max like anyone. Like it's just I love the system. So hope that gives an answer to some of it in there.
I want to kind of like side skirt here a little bit. One thing that I'm really passionate about is the operating systems that I use, right? So I noticed in 2014 that you guys started including Mac compatibility. And I wanted to know what drove you to add Mac compatibility after so many years of just being on Windows, and is Linux a possibility in the future?
So Mac, Apple. Oh, I cannot tell you as a developer how thrilled I was when Apple decided to suddenly deprecate all the 32-bit applications. What a joyful day that was.
That's the first we've ever heard of this.
I'm sensing some sarcasm here.
Yeah. Why Mac was because we knew that there were a lot of people who were playing on a Mac and wanted to be able to do it natively. And to some respect, it was sales-driven to say that we'd been aware of what the market share was. And when I say sales-driven, it's less the belief that if we develop the game for Mac, we can get more money coming in. It was more the sense that the product has continued to perform, the community has continued to buy it. The next thing we were going to put our resources into was Mac compatibility native. Because we recognize that there is a good number of people who play on the Mac. It was never our desire to exclude them. We simply knew the limits of our resources. And if you want an example of where we still haven't gotten everything we wanted, and this one we may never get, is we're not double byte. Will never be translated into any of those Asian languages that require double byte characters, because the underlying architecture, the work involved to transform it would have been Herculean, and there was no way we were doing it. So yeah, it was a belief that the Apple-based player community was significant enough, and the work involved to make it work was not too rough, that we could do it. We did. It was out there. And then Catalina. And the only solution we've seen in the initial couple of months, I started sort of berating ourselves, like, come on, why don't we respond to this thing? And then I started seeing how many other developers, 8, 10, 18 months after, still don't have a really good solution for it. And I realized, okay, I can't be that hard on us. We're not the only ones who got caught into this. What it's caused us to do is Galactic Ruler is already 64-bit and running on DirectX 11, and we already have the architecture for Supreme Ruler Next Gen on the same 64-bit and the same DirectX 11. So at this time, all things being equal and Apple not throwing us another curveball, the threshold for getting Mac version should not be that difficult to achieve. Now, to your half question thrown in there about Linux, your biggest disadvantage, or the biggest argument against getting Linux native, is the Linux community is so good at getting quality emulators. Our understanding is the game runs on the Linux emulator at about 85% of the performance that you get on a native version. It's hard to make the argument. Linux is so flexible that they sort of do most of the job for us. Sorry?
You're probably talking about wine, I think.
Yeah. And in truth, I'm speaking as somebody who's never tried it. I'm only running PC-based systems. But every time the game comes out, we hear a couple people ask Linux, and very quickly members of the community say, I got it on wine, it's running fine. So that, hopefully people can understand why that keeps it a little bit lower in our priority list.
Well, Jean's was known for asking this question as well as asking about mobile apps. John, did I take your next question? Did you want to ask about mobile?
Yeah, actually, that was my next question, so feel free.
Yeah, we'll just shelf that one. Well, it's up to you.
I can talk about it. That it has been considered in the very, very early days, and I'm talking like the first week of talking about Galactic Ruler design questions. Mobile came up as a question about did we want to do that sort of thing? But we're not a studio who's done stuff on mobile. It would be particularly difficult to try and transform us into a studio who does that sort of thing. Just a number of skill sets that we've never developed. And I cannot imagine trying to play a game like ours that uses so many keyboard shortcuts and the way you do a mouse. Like, I've even just tried the machine that I'm sitting in front of this evening is a nice all-in-one with a touchscreen. And I've tried playing Supreme Ruler with a touchscreen, and it's pretty frustrating, to be honest. We've tried over the years to make a few design choices that make touchscreen a little friendlier, but it simply is not the architecture that we had in mind when we designed it initially. As a studio, one of the things that we've sometimes considered on mobile would be more along the lines of offering companion apps, like something that lets you browse your equipment. But I'm not sure how that would fit into the limited resources we have, or delivering something like that. So for the foreseeable future, I don't think you'll see anything Battlegoat on mobile.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't, I know, Jean, you always ask this, but I just can't imagine playing a game with this much detail and so many different screens to click through and get information, and the OOB tabs or the technology tabs where you've just got a lot of information presented. You'd basically have to re-architect your whole UI, and I'm not sure that wouldn't make the computer experience worse. So,
and it's funny the differences we see in what people want out of the user interface, that we get a number of people who come to the game and say they find the user interface overwhelming. And then I mentioned that guy who's shown up the last couple of weeks doing mods. he's got this giant mod where they're pulling one screen and like all 5 of the sub-screens, they're pulling it into giant pop-ups that have all the pieces of information for all the subsets all at once. And yeah, to me, it strikes me as something I would find overwhelming, but it's a clear indication that we have some of our players who that is the way that they would like to play. I don't know that we would ever want that to be our commercial face, the thing that people see first. But we're really happy to have a system that is that flexible that the players can just transform it.
And I guess for my last question, I would have to say, and I guess this would be, we mentioned this earlier, but one of the DLCs that you released a few years ago.
Yes.
To see where I'm going with this, was called Supreme Ruler Trump Rising.
Right.
And it focused on Donald Trump becoming the president of the United States and the global reaction to it. Now, from what I see in the game, it says Europe starts to align with Russia, U.S. starts to abandon them, and because the U.S. goes into turmoil, tears apart the country. The question that I have about this is, this game came out in the summer of 2016.
Yes.
So how in the world did you predict this?
So the game actually was released the same weekend as the Republican convention of Donald Trump trying to become the nominee. And here I'll play on the sarcasm again of it was really hard that he's such a deep and unreadable person that it was really hard to project where all of this was going to go. It definitely was something that we intended as a joke. We did. We really did not think anybody was going to do this. But it fit well with the game, is that we had already been updating since the release in 2014. We kept every couple of months, as elections would happen around the world, we were updating some of the projections. And of course, it was it was always funny because people in 2014 would come to us and say, "Hey, I live in this country. You've given us the wrong leader." And we're like, "No, you're looking at your leader today. The game takes place 6 years from now. We're extrapolating." But closer and closer we got to 2020, it became, you're getting tighter in on some of these things, and we were just already updating these maps. Trump was polarizing before he got elected. That it was irresistible to say, "Hey, let's just have another map," and I guess to what we modeled. And I'm only privy to a bit of the decision-making process, because this was actually the 2 years where I was sort of on sabbatical. I was working at another studio for a while, but I stayed in touch with the team. And it was just, okay, what's some of the crazy stuff that could happen? Let's set a high bar for chaos and put it that way. And I got to say, ultimately, our high bar was really middle ground. We really couldn't have predicted, and it's and obviously there's a few people may feel critical of the way I'm speaking of Donald Trump, and I have my own political views, but the game itself is intended to be entertainment first, and we did get lambasted by both sides. We had Democrats accusing us of doing Republican propaganda, and we had Republicans accusing us of disparaging Donald Trump, and you really couldn't win, to the point that our World War I game, and this still annoys me, we got a thumbs down review on Steam on the World War I game, and I checked it out, and I think the only thing it said was Trump. And so I leave a developer comment, I'm like, "What are you talking about? This is 1914, Trump doesn't show up for 100 years. And like the user's reply was, "I saw your DLC." And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This is like so disconnected. But we even tried, we took Trump's tweeting habit and we gathered a whole bunch of his tweets, and then we created probably about as many more fictional funny things. I think there's one congratulating me for giving him a donut or something. And then all the development team, there is a Trump tweet in the game to each of the development team at that time. And the funny thing is, we've got 50 real ones, 50 fake ones, sort of thing. You read through them, you can't tell which ones are which. because that's the world we live in now. And I actually had somebody who was doing an interview with me just last week asking some of these similar questions, saying, do we think as a studio that people are using this as an armchair quarterback to be able to look at a political situation? And I hope so. I hope that people use this game and see craziness and will therefore be a little more careful in what they choose. And because I'm one of those type of people, the first thing I'm going to tell you is not who to vote for. I'm going to tell you go vote. Cast a vote. I'm confident that if I can encourage you to cast a vote enough times, you'll care about the vote you cast. You'll start researching. And when I look at the numbers I see, I find that the politics I like these days seem to be on an upward trend. So if I can increase the percentage of voters, I feel I get what I want anyway. But it is, it was interesting to launch that into the world. And you look at even our US maps before the DLC for Trump Rising. Wow, did we get that wrong? We had two versions of the United States map. One of them had Hillary Clinton as the leader. The other one had Jeb Bush as the leader. Wow, we got that one wrong.
Please clap.
So, and it is really interesting to be able to model these things and make predictions, see which ones we get right, which ones we get wrong. For here in Canada, we did successfully predict that Justin Trudeau was going to win the election. And we sometimes get criticized that when Supreme Ruler 2020 came out, so you're talking 2008, very soon after, we had some posts on one of our forums angry at us that we had not included Palestine as an independent country in the Middle East area. And we responded very quickly saying, let us be clear that we are not saying that we think the Palestinians should or should not have a state. What we're saying is that by 2020, nobody's going to have figured it out, that it's going to be the same mess it is now. And we're just setting that as a start point. Modding, people can add all sorts of stuff in, and we don't disadvantage anybody. I hope that our goal is to create systems and then have fun in them.
Now, I have a question about the political side of things.
Sure.
Looking back on it, do you have any regrets, or do you think you'd pull any more punches, or are you guys pretty comfortable with the reactions and responses to the...
I'm pretty comfortable, and it also, I don't think that it had much ripple effect. The total number of reviews on the DLC is somewhere around 30, and my instinct is that most of those were positive reviews because they liked the core game. It wasn't a paid DLC, it was free, so that definitely changes the market you're going to get. It's the people who have the game are picking up this extra DLC, or maybe it was paid at the time. See, I don't even remember anymore. But these days, that when you get the game, you're getting the DLC for free, and it is. I can't believe. I choose not to believe that our little game is going to be having a big impact. So, here I'll have fun. That some of your users will like this one. Is I doubt our game has had any more impact than the voter fraud in this election. That'll give people a little bit to chew on. I know what we've put out there, and it's at the end of the day, people are going to play it, enjoy it if they do, and don't if they don't. So,
I mean, because I understand that there's people who are very passionate about politics, and you could potentially turn somebody who would like your game into somebody who would dislike it just on the principle that you disparage their candidate, or even if you don't disparage it, I mean, people will still view it that way, right?
Yes.
They're just so
modeling
sensitive about things.
So it's sometimes that every now and then you sort of you kind of hope that you'll get banned in China because that tends to get you really good publicity.
That's right.
And anybody who chats with us on our forums can sort of pick up some of what our own personal political leanings are. But like I said, we try and be very careful to not make that a part of what the company is or the company does. Is that if somebody is feeling that they would really like to see a United States whole under a Donald Trump president, the game allows you to do that. And you can even, if you truly believe that he as a president has been maligned, you can set up your world. You can make a mod where he's being treated in that where he's liked and disliked in ways that you would want to see. And then check it out. See what that world looks like. See if you're happy with it or what it is. And again, even if you set aside the specific political pieces or political people, just me as a person, when I'm running any of the regions I go into, the choices I'm going to make about the level of taxation in the various categories and the social spending that I'm going to choose to put into the different categories is a reflection of what I think a world should be. But some games, I'm like, I'm going to play totally opposite to what I believe, because I think this set of settings is going to make me more money and screw my people, and I don't care because I'm a strong believer in what if scenarios and allowing people to do exploration. And that's one of the big things I hope our game gives people out there.
Well, I don't know if we have any other questions, John or Matt.
Oh, I think it's been fascinating to hear about this. I know I've played multiple different iterations of Supreme Ruler, and I've enjoyed them all. But I think, as you said, it's a bit of a unique space. I mean, if I was to try and compare it to another game, I know we've mentioned Superpower. I think the one sort of mainstream game that I would say there's definitely elements of it in is Hearts of Iron. It's a very different game. But Hearts of Iron is similar. I think one of the big differences, other than sort of some of the way the game's designed, but one of I think the fundamental differences is that Hearts of Iron is a World War II game that really only grounds itself in World War II. And I think if that's the kind of game you enjoy, but you'd like to see it expanded out to other eras, I think Supreme Ruler really delivers on a lot of that, what you're looking for and what makes people drawn to Hearts of Iron.
Yeah. Because we're talking about it, there's two other differences I'll call out, if you don't mind. Hearts of Iron definitely has that development team had much more interest in the internal politics and working. That the way while we have ministers that you can automate a number of things, the political system in our games is fully abstracted. It wasn't something we had really any interest in modeling, so that's absent. The other thing is the way territory is managed. That Hearts of Iron uses their province system, which is it's this a delineated surface area that you control or don't control, or it's under or it's contested sort of thing. Whereas our game really it is hex by hex ownership. There are blocks within that, such as loyalty, that may define a thing, or when you conquer a country, you can gain all of that loyalty area. But it is much more down to the hex by hex tactical combat. And again, that is the type of thing that we wanted. We don't feel that we're better than Hearts of Iron, but I usually like to make that specific distinction because it can affect people's choices on whether they think they'll like one, the other, or both.
Yeah, and I think I was projecting a little because I think one of the things I commonly see, and certainly one of the things I enjoy about Hearts of Iron that I think you definitely get in Supreme Ruler as well, is this idea of sort of managing the production, managing the makeup of your armed forces, getting ready for the moment to go to war, and then unleashing everything into in the case of Hearts of Iron, into a World War II or World War II, whatever your version of it looks like. But the difference is that Hearts of Iron is it's kind of, you build up for the war and then you fight the war and then it's over, whereas depending on what you're playing in Supreme Ruler, you have that post-war, and then you have the world continues. Whereas Hearts of Iron is just really sort of grounded in if you're being generous, 20 years, probably closer to 15-year period of time.
And in our game's economic model, I know there's a few people out there who still wish that we'd make some changes to some of the stuff, or don't feel that it is as complex as it actually is under the hood. But we've done tests where we'll just start the game before you go to bed and let the thing run for 10 hours and then come back and analyze and done some analysis. And we've been able to see that within the economic model we have, left to its own devices, the economies will experience crashes and rebounds in 20 to 40 year blocks in the way some of the things do. Not necessarily every time, but there definitely is a living system underneath there that, I hope it has that interesting flow from battle to battle, and the whole riding waves on a surf of being able to see the ups and downs. It's definitely something I hope we deliver.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I mean, thank you so much for coming on, but also maybe we'll give you the floor for a second. Is there anything that we didn't really touch upon that you wanted to talk about, or any topic you wanted to bring up with us before we adjourn?
I don't think that I've got anything specific, other than I'll take a moment to plug the fact that anybody wanting to follow our development progress, we do make sure and track the forums that Steam gives us for all of the games that we've published, but we also maintain our own www.bg forums. That's a development forum that's been up since 2002, getting user feedback. We do maintain the usual social media. You can find us on there. We have our own Discord channel, though that tends to be more between the users than the developers will pop in and stuff, but it's more user chat. And YouTube, that we do try and do a good number of developer updates to just let the community have an eye into what we're doing. That we really feel that the community is a key element of our success in the projects we've done and will do in the future. And that is the way that we've chosen to sort of have some of that interaction, is to do those developer blogs and give a little bit of insight to what's happening behind the scenes. And I got to thank all of you guys, that podcasts like these, being able to chat, like we were all talking about, the game we make is quite unique. There's not many things out there. So getting people to talk about it, and great YouTubers like Tortuga who do streams about our game that we really appreciate, this is really what helps people who never knew they wanted the game find it. So thanks to all of you guys for hosting this.
Well, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure to talk about Supreme Ruler with you, and appreciate your time as well.
Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, thank you so much, Chris.
And I look forward to your 2024 prediction DLC.
Yes, that'll be interesting.
They already had it. There's a scenario where the U.S. breaks up into 50 different countries. Right?
We did that one, I think, as a 2020 scenario.
Oh well,
Yeah.
I guess
We dodged
got
it.
a couple. Yeah, did we or didn't
Well,
we? We got a couple more.
We'll
weeks.
talk to you guys at the end of January. We're up north here watching with bated breath.